The candles were wrong. Lysara noticed it immediately, the way the flames flickered unevenly across the dining table, casting shadows that made the silver look tarnished instead of gleaming. Someone had placed the tapers too close to the floral arrangements, and if they burned another hour, the roses would wilt from the heat. No one else would notice. No one ever noticed. She moved quietly along the wall, invisible as always, adjusting the candelabra with practiced efficiency, while her father's voice boomed through the grand dining room of Briarfield Manor. "And of course, Your Grace, our Cassia has been preparing for weeks. She's been beside herself with anticipation." Lysara's fingers tightened on the silver base. Cassia had been preparing for exactly 2 hours, emerging from her chambers only when her maid finally achieved the perfect arrangement of golden curls. The weeks of preparation had fallen to Lysara. The menus, the flowers, the servants' schedules, the endless small crises that no one thanked her for solving. This had been her life since their father's business failed 5 years ago, since the family had slowly crumbled from comfortable prosperity into genteel poverty. Her mother had retreated into quiet endurance. Her father had retreated into denial and drink, and Lysara had stepped into the gap, managing a household that was slowly falling apart at the seams, while everyone pretended nothing had changed. She risked a glance at the guest of honor. Hadrian Ashworth, Duke of Thornwood, sat at the head of the table with the kind of stillness that suggested either profound boredom or barely concealed irritation. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30 or 31, with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on a classical sculpture. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, eyes the color of a winter storm. Those eyes were fixed on Cassia with polite attention as she laughed at something their father said. Cassia was radiant, of course. She was always radiant. The candlelight loved her, turning her golden hair into a halo, making her porcelain skin glow like moonlight on still water. Her rose silk gown had cost more than the servants' wages for 3 months, and she wore it like she'd been born draped in luxury. No one looked at Lysara in her sensible gray dress, her dark hair pinned back in a practical knot, her hands rough from the work of managing a household that pretended to be something it no longer was. That was the way of things. "And what of your other daughter, Baron?" Lysara froze, her hand still on the candelabra. The Duke's voice was low and precise, cutting through her father's effusive chatter like a blade through silk. Her father blinked, momentarily confused. "My other? Oh, you mean Lysara?" "Yes, well, she's here somewhere. Managing things, I expect. She's always managing something." He waved a dismissive hand. "Not one for society, I'm afraid. Prefers books and ledgers to ballrooms." How unfortunate for society. There was something in the Duke's tone that made Lysara look up, and she found those storm-gray eyes fixed directly on her. Her breath caught. He wasn't looking at her the way most guests did, as an extension of the furniture, as a servant in better clothing. He was looking at her the way one might examine an unexpected piece on a chessboard, with sharp curiosity and sudden interest. "You've been adjusting the candles," he said. It wasn't a question. They were too close to the flowers, Your Grace. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The heat would have wilted them within the hour. "And you noticed this, while everyone else was focused on other things." Cassia's laugh had faltered. Lysara could feel her sister's attention swinging toward her like a searchlight. "Someone has to notice, Your Grace. Wilted roses make a poor impression." The words were out before she could stop them. Sharp, almost impertinent. Her father made a strangled sound, but the Duke smiled. It transformed his face entirely, cracking through that marble stillness like sunlight breaking through clouds. For just a moment, he looked almost human. "Indeed they do, Miss Wincombe." He rose from his chair with fluid grace. "I find myself curious about your roses. Perhaps you'd show me the gardens while your sister entertains our fathers with music? Lysara's mind went blank. She can't, Cassia said quickly, her voice bright and brittle. Lysara doesn't walk in the gardens. She's always busy with household matters. I'd be happy to show you myself, Your Grace. I'm sure you would. The Duke's smile didn't waver, but something cooled in his eyes. However, I specifically asked Miss Lysara, unless there's some reason she cannot accept? He was looking at her again, waiting. Lysara understood suddenly that this was a test, not of her, but of her family, of how they treated her, of whether they would overrule her own choices. The gardens are lovely in the evening, she heard herself say, if Your Grace doesn't mind the chill. Her father opened his mouth to object, but the Duke was already moving, offering his arm with an expectation of obedience that came from a lifetime of being obeyed. Lysara took it. She felt Cassia's glare burning into her back as they walked through the French doors onto the terrace, but she didn't turn around. The garden was cool and quiet, a welcome relief from the suffocating pressure of the dining room. Moonlight silvered the paths between the hedges, and somewhere in the darkness, a nightingale was singing its evening song. You may breathe now, the Duke said dryly. We're safely out of earshot. Lysara released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I apologize if I overstepped, Your Grace. I shouldn't have spoken honestly. He guided her toward a stone bench near the roses, his pace unhurried. That's precisely why I wanted to speak with you, Miss Wincombe. You're the only person in that house who hasn't lied to me all evening. She stiffened. My family hasn't. Your father has told me 6 times how delighted your sister is about this courtship, when it's perfectly obvious she'd rather be anywhere else. Your sister has laughed at jokes that weren't funny and agreed with opinions she clearly doesn't hold. Even the servants have been coached to praise her accomplishments as though reading from a script. He stopped, turning to face her. But you looked at me like I was an inconvenience, disrupting your careful management of the household. Lysara's face heated. I didn't. You did. It was refreshing. She didn't know what to say to that. This wasn't how conversations with dukes were supposed to go. She was supposed to be invisible, unnoticed. Certainly not standing in a moonlit garden being told she was refreshing. Your Grace, she said carefully. I'm not sure what you want from me. Neither am I. He sounded almost surprised by his own honesty. I came here expecting the usual performance. Beautiful daughter, desperate father, a marriage negotiated like a business transaction. I've seen it a dozen times this season. I'm exhausted by it. Then why come at all? His jaw tightened. Because my mother has made it clear that if I don't choose a bride by season's end, she'll choose one for me. Your sister seemed tolerable, at least on paper. Cassia is more than tolerable. She's accomplished, well-mannered, and beautiful. Beautiful. He said the word like it was a disease. Do you know how many beautiful women I've met this season, Miss Wincombe? Dozens. Scores. All of them performing the same dance, saying the same words, laughing at the same jokes. Beauty without substance is just another form of emptiness. Lysara thought of Cassia, who cried when she thought no one was watching, who had confided once, years ago, that she wished someone would see past her face to the person beneath, who performed because it was expected, because their father demanded it, because beauty was the only currency their family had left. Perhaps, Lysara said quietly, if you looked harder, you might find substance beneath the performance. In your sister? In anyone who's been trained from birth that their worth lies in being pleasant and agreeable. It's difficult to show your true self when you've been told your true self isn't valuable enough. The Duke studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. And you? He asked. Have you been told your true self isn't valuable? I've been told nothing, Your Grace, which is its own kind of message. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Lysara wanted to snatch them back, to retreat behind the safe wall of invisibility she'd spent years building. Instead, the Duke sat down on the stone bench and gestured for her to join him. Tell me about yourself, Miss Wincombe. Not the version your father would have me hear. The real one. She should refuse. She should make excuses about the household, about duties, about the impropriety of sitting alone with a duke in a moonlit garden. But something in his voice, some genuine curiosity that cut through his aristocratic reserve, made her sink onto the bench beside him. There isn't much to tell. I manage the household. I balance the accounts. I ensure the servants are paid, and the roof doesn't leak, and the roses don't wilt from candle heat. She paused. I'm the one who makes sure everything runs smoothly, so that everyone else can pretend we're still wealthy. You're not? We haven't been wealthy in years, Your Grace. My father's investments failed. My mother's dowry is long spent. The only thing we have left is Cassia's beauty, and the hope that someone important will marry her before the creditors come calling. She shouldn't be saying this. It was madness, revealing their family's secrets to the very man they were trying to impress. But the words kept coming, loosened by moonlight and exhaustion, and the strange intimacy of being truly seen for the first time in years. Why are you telling me this? The Duke asked, his voice soft. Because you asked for honesty, and because it doesn't matter. You'll marry Cassia or someone like her, and I'll continue managing ledgers until I'm old and gray, and they finally put me in a cottage somewhere out of sight. That's how these stories end for women like me. What if it didn't have to be? Lysara laughed, a bitter sound. With respect, Your Grace, fairy tales are for beautiful sisters, not for the ones who arrange the candles. Hadrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, losing some of its aristocratic distance. What if I proposed something unconventional? I can't imagine what that would be. Come to Thornwood Hall, not as a servant, not as a companion, as a guest. Let me present you to society as I see you, a woman of intelligence and capability and refreshing honesty. Lysara stared at him. You're not serious. I'm entirely serious. My mother wants me to court someone this season. She didn't specify whom. If I arrive with you on my arm, unexpected and intriguing, it disrupts all her careful plans without technically disobeying her demands. You want to use me as a distraction. I want to spend time with someone who doesn't bore me to tears. He leaned forward, his eyes intense in the moonlight. You said yourself that beautiful sisters get the fairy tales. What if, just once, the story went differently? What if the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one who arranges the candles, what if she got to step into the light? And when the season ends, when you've made your point to your mother and no longer need a distraction, then you return home with connections, references, opportunities you'd never have otherwise. I can ensure you're introduced to the right people. By season's end, you could have your choice of positions: governess, companion, estate manager, whatever future you want to build. It was madness, complete madness. But Lysara thought of the ledgers, the endless columns of debt that never quite balanced. She thought of Cassia's future tied to her face, of her father's increasingly desperate schemes, of her own slow erasure from everything that mattered. What about Cassia? She asked. You came here to court her. Your sister doesn't want to marry me any more than I want to marry her. I could see it in her eyes the moment we met. She's performing duty, not desire. My father will never agree. Your father will agree to anything if it means a duke shows favor to his family. And I will show favor, Miss Wincombe. Genuine favor. Whatever happens, your family's fortunes will improve. You're offering to buy me. I'm offering you a choice. He stood, extending his hand. For once in your life, the overlooked daughter gets to choose. Not your father. Not your sister. You. Lysara looked at his outstretched hand. She thought of all the years of invisibility, of being the one who managed and solved and sacrificed while others took the credit. She thought of candles and roses and ledgers that never balanced. She thought of what it might feel like to be seen. 3 conditions, she heard herself say. His eyebrow rose. You're negotiating with me? You said I could choose. Choices come with terms. She lifted her chin, emboldened by the darkness and the strangeness of the moment. If I'm to risk my reputation on your scheme, I want guarantees in return. Something flickered in his eyes. Interest, perhaps respect. Name them. First, my sister must be taken care of, introduced to appropriate suitors, given genuine opportunities, not cast aside because you chose differently. Done. Second, if this arrangement ends, for whatever reason, it ends cleanly. No scandal attached to my name or my family's. You have my word. And third, she met his eyes directly, unflinching. If you decide at any point that you genuinely wish to pursue someone, whether it's Cassia or any other woman, you tell me immediately. I won't be made a fool of, Your Grace. I've spent too many years being invisible to become visible only as a joke. The garden was silent except for the nightingale. Then Hadrian smiled, and it was different from before. Warmer. More real. You have my word on all 3 conditions, Miss Wincombe. He extended his hand again. Do we have an agreement? Lysara took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, sealing a bargain that would change everything. She just didn't know yet how much. The carriage arrived at Thornwood Hall 3 days later, and Lysara pressed her face to the window, like a child seeing the ocean for the first time. The estate was enormous, not merely large in the way that Briarfield was large, all faded grandeur and patched dignity, but vast in a way that spoke of generations of unimaginable wealth. The drive alone seemed to stretch for miles, lined with ancient oaks, whose branches formed a cathedral ceiling of green and gold. And then the house itself appeared. Stone and glass and towering columns, windows that caught the afternoon sun like rows of diamonds, gardens that rolled away in every direction like an emerald sea. Lysara counted chimneys until she lost track. Somewhere around 30. Breathe, said a voice beside her. She'd almost forgotten the Duke's brother was in the carriage. Corwin Ashworth was younger than Hadrian by several years, with the same dark hair, but an easier smile, the kind of man who seemed delighted by life rather than burdened by it. I'm breathing, she said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. You've gone rather pale. I'd hate to deliver you to Hadrian already fainted. Corwin grinned. Though it would make an excellent entrance. Very dramatic. I'm not going to faint. That's what they all say. Then they see the great hall, and down they go. Lysara turned from the window to study him. He'd been friendly throughout the journey, filling the silence with easy conversation, while Hadrian rode alongside on horseback. She wasn't sure if his warmth was genuine or performed, another layer of aristocratic polish. Does your family often have this effect on people? Constantly. It's exhausting. We can't take anyone anywhere without smelling salts. He leaned forward conspiratorially. Between us, the house isn't even that impressive on the inside. Drafty corridors, gloomy portraits of disapproving ancestors, a ghost in the east wing, though no one's seen her in decades. A ghost? Lady Ashworth claims it's her great-great-aunt, doomed to wander for some romantic transgression. Mother uses her as a warning against improper behavior. Choose poorly, and you too may spend eternity haunting hallways. Despite her nerves, Lysara felt her lips twitch. Your family sounds colorful. That's one word for it. Another would be terrifying, but you'll manage. Anyone who can negotiate conditions with my brother can certainly survive tea with Mother. The carriage rolled to a stop before the grand entrance, and Lysara's momentary ease evaporated. Servants were already assembling on the steps, a small army in matching livery, their faces carefully blank. "Ready?" Corwin asked. "No. Perfect. That's the spirit." The carriage door opened, and Lysara stepped out into her new life. The great hall was exactly as overwhelming as Corwin had promised, though she managed not to faint. Marble floors stretched in every direction. A staircase swept upward, like something from a fever dream. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Ashworths gazing down with the kind of aristocratic disapproval that seemed bred into noble bloodlines. Hadrian was already inside, having arrived moments before. He stood near the fireplace, still in his riding clothes, speaking quietly with a severe-looking woman in gray who was clearly the housekeeper. "Miss Wincombe." He crossed to her, his face giving nothing away. "Welcome to Thornwood Hall." "Your Grace." She managed a curtsy that didn't wobble, which felt like a victory. "Mrs. Pemberton will show you to your rooms. The lavender suite has been prepared. I trust you'll find it comfortable." The lavender suite. She had a suite, with a name. "I'm sure it will be perfect, Your Grace." "Dinner is at 8. My mother will join us." Something flickered in his eyes. "Be prepared." Before Lysara could ask what exactly she should prepare for, the housekeeper was guiding her toward the staircase with brisk efficiency. Corwin gave her an encouraging wave from below. The lavender suite was larger than the entire upper floor of Briarfield Manor. Lysara stood in the center of the bedroom, turning slowly to take it all in. The four-poster bed was draped in silk, the color of twilight, delicate and impossibly soft. The windows looked out over gardens that seemed to stretch to the horizon. A sitting room connected through an archway, complete with its own fireplace, and a writing desk positioned to catch the morning light. There was a wardrobe, too, empty, waiting. "I've been assigned as your lady's maid, miss." Lysara spun to find a young woman hovering in the doorway, red-haired and freckled, with an uncertain smile. "I'm Nell. Mrs. Pemberton said you might need help settling in." Yes. Thank you, Nell." The girl entered, beginning to unpack Lysara's modest trunk with careful hands. Her expression flickered briefly at the contents, the worn dresses, the mended stockings, the shawl that had been re-hemmed 3 times, but she said nothing. "His Grace has arranged for a modiste to visit tomorrow," Nell offered, "for your new wardrobe." "A new wardrobe?" "Yes, miss. He sent word ahead. Said you're to have everything you need." Lysara sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. 3 days ago, she'd been arranging candles and balancing ledgers, invisible in her own home. Now she was sitting in a lavender suite with a lady's maid, waiting for a modiste, preparing to dine with a duchess. The world had tilted on its axis, and she wasn't sure which way was up anymore. "Miss?" Nell's voice was gentle. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. "Just tired from the journey." "Of course, miss. I'll have tea sent up. And perhaps a bath before dinner? The water here is lovely, drawn from the estate's own spring." A bath, with spring water, in her own suite. "That would be... yes, thank you." Nell disappeared, and Lysara lay back on the impossibly soft bed, staring at the painted ceiling above her. Angels and clouds, a heavenly scene rendered in delicate blues and golds. She'd agreed to this. She'd shaken the Duke's hand, and sealed a bargain that brought her here, to this palace, to this impossible life. But as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, and the reality of her situation settled over her like a silk shroud, Lysara couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stepped into a story much larger than herself, and she had no idea how it would end. The Duchess of Thornwood descended for dinner at precisely 8 o'clock, and Lysara understood immediately why Hadrian had told her to be prepared. Lady Ashworth wasn't a woman. She was a force of nature contained in human form, tall and silver-haired, with the same storm gray eyes as her son, but sharper, more cutting. She swept into the dining room like a general surveying a battlefield. Her mourning blacks had clearly ended years ago, but she wore deep purple, as though daring anyone to suggest she'd ever fully surrendered to grief. Diamonds glittered at her throat, cold fire against pale skin. She stopped 3 feet from Lysara and looked her up and down with the assessing gaze of someone evaluating livestock at auction. "So," she said, her voice crisp and clear as winter ice, "this is the girl who convinced my son to abandon his courtship of Baron Wincome's daughter." Lysara curtsied, willing her knees not to tremble. "Your Grace." "I didn't ask for your greeting. I made a statement." The Duchess circled her slowly, examining every detail. "Adequate posture, tolerable coloring. Your dress is 2 seasons old, and poorly mended at the left sleeve. Those are not your pearls." "No, Your Grace. They're my mother's." "Your mother being alive but reduced to circumstances that require such loans." "Yes, Your Grace." The Duchess completed her circle, coming to stand directly in front of Lysara. "My son tells me you manage your family's household, that you balance their accounts and supervise their servants." "I do, Your Grace." "He also tells me you negotiated conditions for this arrangement, that you demanded certain guarantees before agreeing to his proposal." Lysara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I felt it prudent to establish clear terms, Your Grace." "Prudent." The Duchess's lips curved, though it couldn't quite be called a smile. "Prudent is an interesting word. Most young women in your position would have simply swooned with gratitude and agreed to whatever was offered. With respect, Your Grace, swooning has never served me particularly well." The silence that followed was suffocating. Lysara could feel Hadrian's gaze on her from across the room, could sense Corwin's tension near the doorway. She'd overstepped. She'd spoken too freely to a duchess in her own home, and now she would pay for it. Then Lady Ashworth laughed. It was sharp and brief, more bark than amusement, but it cracked through the tension like lightning through clouds. "Spine," she declared. "You have spine. That's unexpected." She gestured imperiously toward the dining table. "Sit. We'll eat, and you'll tell me exactly why I shouldn't have you removed from my home by morning." Dinner was elaborate and excruciating. Course after course of dishes Lysara couldn't identify, served on china that probably cost more than her father's annual income. She watched the Duchess from the corner of her eye, copying her selection of utensils, her timing, her elegant way of eating without ever actually appearing to consume anything. "Stop mimicking me," the Duchess said without looking up. "It's transparent." Lysara froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. "If you don't know which implement to use, ask. Pretending you belong when you clearly don't is far more insulting than honest ignorance." "I apologize, Your Grace." "Don't apologize. It suggests weakness." The Duchess set down her wineglass with deliberate precision. "Now, tell me about your family situation. The truth, not the polished version your father peddles to potential suitors." Lysara glanced at Hadrian, who gave a barely perceptible nod. She told the truth. She spoke of her father's failed investments, the gradual erosion of their wealth, the careful pretense maintained to avoid scandal. She explained her role in keeping the household functional, the ledgers she balanced, and the creditors she held at bay with careful negotiations and deferred payments. She told the Duchess about Cassia, too, about her sister's genuine qualities hidden beneath the performance, about the pressure she faced to be beautiful and agreeable and marriageable, about the tears she cried when no one was watching. When she finished, the Duchess was watching her with features that gave nothing away. "You advocate for your sister even now," Lady Ashworth observed. "Even though my son chose you over her, even though you could easily have portrayed her as vapid competition. Cassia isn't competition, Your Grace. She's my sister. She's been forced into a role she didn't choose, performing for audiences who only value her face. That's not her fault. And you believe she deserves better? I believe everyone deserves to be seen for who they actually are, not who they're expected to be. The Duchess was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to her son. Hadrian, leave us. Mother, I wish to speak with Miss Wincombe alone. Take your brother and find something useful to do. Hadrian's jaw tightened, but he rose from his chair with the controlled grace of someone who'd learned long ago not to argue with his mother. Corwin followed, casting Lysara a sympathetic look over his shoulder. The door closed behind them, and Lysara was alone with the Duchess of Thornwood. Stand up, Lady Ashworth commanded. Lysara obeyed, her heart pounding. The Duchess rose as well, moving to the window that overlooked the darkened gardens. For a moment, she simply stood there, her reflection ghostly in the glass. My husband died 3 years ago, she said finally, her voice stripped of its earlier sharpness. A sudden illness. No warning, no time to prepare. One day, he was here, vital and impossible, and the center of everything. The next, he was gone. Lysara didn't know what to say. The Duchess hadn't asked for condolences. Hadrian was in London when it happened. Parliamentary business. He didn't reach home in time to say goodbye. Lady Ashworth turned from the window, her eyes glittering with something that might have been grief or might have been steel. He's been punishing himself ever since, burying himself in duty, avoiding anything that resembles genuine feeling. He goes through the motions of living without actually being alive. Your Grace, I'm not finished. The Duchess moved closer, her presence filling the room. I have watched my son wither for 3 years. I have pushed him toward suitable matches because I believed duty might save him, that marriage and heirs and responsibility might force him to engage with the world again. It hasn't worked. He simply performs courtship the way he performs everything else. Empty gestures from an empty man. Lysara inhaled sharply with sudden understanding. You love him. Of course I love him. He's my son. The words came out fierce, almost angry. But love doesn't mean I know how to help him. I've tried everything. Pressure, patience, indulgence, severity. Nothing reaches him. Then why are you telling me this? The Duchess studied her for a long moment, her gaze piercing. Because tonight, at dinner, when you spoke about your sister, about people deserving to be seen for who they truly are, my son looked at you like you'd said something that mattered. Like he was actually hearing the words instead of simply processing them. A tremor ran through Lysara's chest. I don't know what you are to him, the Duchess continued. A novelty, perhaps. A disruption to his careful routines. But whatever it is, it's the first spark of interest I've seen in him since his father died. Your Grace, I think you misunderstand. Our arrangement is... I know exactly what your arrangement is. Do you think servants don't talk? Do you think I haven't pieced together the transaction my son proposed in your family's garden? The Duchess's voice hardened. He believes he's using you to escape my machinations. Perhaps he is. But that doesn't explain why he chose you specifically, why he couldn't simply select any willing participant for his little rebellion. Lysara had no answer for that. I'm not going to fight you, the Duchess said, surprising her. I'm not going to scheme to remove you or make your time here miserable. What would be the point? If my son is determined to pursue this farce, I'd rather observe where it leads than force it underground. What do you want from me, then? The question came out steadier than Lysara felt. Lady Ashworth smiled, and for the first time, it held a trace of genuine warmth. I want you to be exactly what you've been all evening. Honest. stubborn, unwilling to perform for approval. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. My son has spent 3 years surrounded by people who agree with everything he says and want nothing but his title. You looked at him like he was just a man. Perhaps that's what he needs. And if I fail? If this arrangement ends badly? The warmth vanished from the Duchess's expression, replaced by something cold and absolute. Then I will ensure you never work in any household of consequence for the rest of your life. I will close every door that might otherwise open to you. I will make certain that your family's creditors learn exactly how precarious your situation truly is. She paused, letting the words sink in. I protect my children, Miss Wincombe, even from themselves, especially from themselves. If you hurt my son, if you manipulate him, if you damage what little capacity for feeling he has left, I understand, Your Grace. I hope you do. The Duchess opened the door, revealing the empty hallway beyond. Breakfast is at 9. Don't be late. She swept out, leaving Lysara alone in the vast dining room, surrounded by half-finished plates and the lingering scent of expensive wine. She'd just been given both a warning and a test. The Duchess wanted her son to live again, to feel again, and to emerge from the shell of duty he'd constructed around himself. But she'd also made clear the price of failure. Lysara sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. Through the window, she could see the moon rising over the gardens, casting silver light across paths she didn't yet know. Somewhere in this enormous house, the Duke of Thornwood was carrying grief he couldn't name and wounds he wouldn't acknowledge, and somehow, impossibly, the task of reaching him had fallen to the girl no one noticed. She wasn't sure if that made her lucky or doomed. Perhaps, she thought, as she rose to find her way back to the lavender suite. It was both. The modiste arrived the next morning with 3 assistants, 17 bolts of fabric, and the unshakable confidence of someone who had dressed royalty and found them wanting. No, 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 Madame Fontaine declared, circling Lysara with pins bristling from her wrist cushion like a hedgehog's quills. The gray washes you out. The brown makes you look like a governess. Who has been dressing you, child? Someone who wished you harm. I dressed myself, madam. That explains everything. For the next 4 hours, Lysara was measured, pinned, draped, and assessed from every angle. Madame Fontaine made pronouncements about her coloring, warm, requiring jewel tones, her figure, slender, but with adequate presence, and her carriage, surprisingly elegant for someone of her background. The sapphire silk for the Hartwell ball, the modiste announced, holding a swatch against Lysara's face. With gold embroidery at the bodice. You will be memorable, which is what His Grace requires. His Grace. Lysara hadn't seen Hadrian since dinner the previous night. He'd been absent at breakfast, apparently riding the estate as he did most mornings. The Duchess had presided over the meal with cool formality, asking pointed questions about Lysara's education and accomplishments, while Corwin attempted to lighten the mood with increasingly desperate humor. Does His Grace approve all the wardrobe selections? Lysara asked, trying to sound casual. Madame Fontaine's eyebrow arched. His Grace approves the bills. The selections are mine. I do not require approval from men who cannot distinguish taffeta from tulle. By afternoon, Lysara had been fitted for more dresses than she'd owned in her entire life. Morning gowns, afternoon dresses, evening wear, ball gowns, pelisses and spencers, and shawls in coordinating colors. Gloves in 3 lengths. Slippers to match each ensemble. It was overwhelming, excessive, entirely unnecessary for someone who was, at her core, simply playing a role. And yet, when Nell helped her into one of the finished day dresses, a soft rose muslin that somehow made her dark hair gleam and her pale skin glow, Lysara barely recognized herself in the mirror. You look beautiful, miss, Nell said quietly, Beautiful. No one had ever used that word for her. That was Cassia's word, Cassia's domain. Lysara was sensible, practical, capable, not beautiful. I look expensive, she corrected, though her voice lacked conviction. She found Hadrian in the library. It was perhaps the only room in Thornwood Hall that felt lived in. The leather chairs worn soft from use, books stacked on surfaces as though someone had actually been reading them, a fire crackling despite the mild weather. The smell of old paper and wood smoke wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. He was seated at a desk by the window, surrounded by correspondence, his dark head bent over what appeared to be estate accounts. The afternoon light caught the sharp planes of his face, softening them slightly, making him look younger, more human. "You're staring, Miss Wincombe." Lysara startled. She hadn't realized he'd noticed her in the doorway. "I was observing," she said, echoing a distinction she wasn't sure actually existed. "Observing what, precisely?" "That you work constantly, even now, with guests in your home, with a season to navigate. You're buried in ledgers. Someone has to manage the estate. You have stewards, secretaries, an army of people paid specifically to handle these matters." Hadrian set down his pen with deliberate care, finally turning to face her. His expression was guarded, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she'd challenged him. "And what would you have me do instead? Join the garden party my mother is currently inflicting on the local gentry? Make small talk about hunting and weather until I want to drown myself in the ornamental pond? I would have you explain why a man with every advantage in the world chooses to hide in his library rather than live his life." The words hung between them, sharp and unexpected. Lysara hadn't meant to say them, hadn't meant to push, but something about his deliberate isolation sparked frustration she couldn't contain. Hadrian's jaw tightened. "You presume much. You invited me here. You asked for honesty. Did you only want honesty that flattered you?" For a long moment she thought he would dismiss her, send her away with cutting aristocratic coldness, and retreat back behind his walls of ledgers and duty. Instead, he laughed. It was rusty, as though he'd forgotten how, but it cracked through his reserve like light through a shuttered window. "No one speaks to me like this," he said. "Not even my mother. And she speaks to everyone exactly as she pleases. Perhaps that's the problem. Everyone treats you like a title instead of a person." "And you don't?" "I can't afford to. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because we made an arrangement, and arrangements require honesty to function." Hadrian studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit. If you're going to interrogate me, you might as well be comfortable." Lysara sat, arranging the rose muslin carefully around her legs. The dress still felt foreign, like wearing someone else's skin. "Tell me about your father," she said. The question clearly surprised him. His hand moved unconsciously to a letter on his desk, touching it briefly before pulling away. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me. You mentioned him that night in the garden, when you spoke of beauty without substance. He gave you that perspective. He gave me many things." Hadrian's voice had gone quiet, losing its defensive edge. "A love of books, an understanding that duty matters but isn't everything. The belief that genuine connection is worth more than advantageous alliance." "He sounds remarkable." "He was." The words came out rough, raw. "He was impossible and stubborn and entirely uninterested in playing the game society expected. Mother spent half their marriage apologizing for his eccentricities. But he was also kind, genuinely kind, not performatively so. He remembered the names of every servant. He visited tenants when they were ill. He saw people as people, not as positions or functions." Lysara thought of her own father, who barely remembered she existed unless he needed something managed. The contrast was painful. How did he die? Hadrian's hand clenched on the desk. Fever. It came on suddenly, no warning signs. He went from vibrant to bedridden in 3 days, gone in 5. A muscle jumped in his jaw. I was in London. Parliament was in session, and there was a vote I thought mattered. By the time word reached me, by the time I made it home, you didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to say anything. He was already gone when I arrived. Mother was sitting with his body, just sitting there, like she'd forgotten how to move. And I stood in the doorway thinking that I'd traded my father's final hours for a vote that ultimately changed nothing. The grief in his voice was ancient and fresh simultaneously, a wound that had never properly healed because he'd never let anyone near enough to help clean it. It wasn't your fault, Lysara said quietly. Wasn't it? I chose duty over presence. I chose politics over family. That's exactly what he taught me not to do, and I did it anyway. And now I can never. He stopped, jaw clamped shut against whatever was threatening to emerge. Lysara waited. She didn't offer platitudes or reassurances. She simply sat in the silence with him, letting it breathe, letting him feel whatever he needed to feel without judgment. Finally, Hadrian released a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. I've never told anyone that. The full truth of it. Not even Mother. Maybe you needed to. Maybe. He looked at her. Really looked. And the air between them altered subtly. The walls were still there, but they'd developed cracks. You're unexpected, Miss Wincombe. Lysara, if I'm going to be your fictional courtship interest, you should probably use my Christian name. Lysara, then. He said it carefully, like he was tasting the syllables. Tell me something about yourself. Something you've never told anyone else. It seems only fair. She considered the request. Honesty demanded honesty in return. I was supposed to be the beauty, she said finally. When I was young, everyone said I'd grow into my features, that I'd be even lovelier than my mother. But then Cassia came along, and she was golden from the start, and somehow I just faded, became the sensible one, the capable one, the one who managed things while Cassia sparkled. That bothers you. It used to. Now I'm not sure. She smoothed a wrinkle from her skirt, avoiding his gaze. Being invisible has advantages. No one expects anything from you. No one watches your every move, waiting for you to fail or succeed. You're free in a strange way, because you don't matter enough to be constrained. You matter. The words were simple, direct, utterly unexpected. Lysara looked up to find Hadrian watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. You matter, he repeated. I knew it that first night, when you were adjusting candles while everyone else performed their tedious social dance. You were the only genuine thing in that room. The only person actually doing something real instead of pretending. Emotion pressed against her chest. You barely knew me. I knew enough. I know more now. He stood, moving to a shelf beside the window. When he returned, he was carrying a small leather-bound book, old and clearly well-loved. This was my father's. He carried it everywhere, read from it constantly. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to open it. But I think, he extended it toward her, I think he would have wanted someone to read it. Someone who would appreciate it. Lysara took the book with trembling hands. The leather was soft from years of handling, the pages edged in faded gold. She opened it carefully and found dense, handwritten notes in the margins, a conversation between reader and text spanning decades. Marcus Aurelius, she breathed. The Meditations. You know it? I've always wanted to read it. We couldn't afford. She stopped, embarrassed. It's yours now, along with whatever else from this library catches your interest. Hadrian's voice had softened. Consider it a gift, from one invisible person to another. You're not invisible. You're a duke. Being stared at isn't the same as being seen. You know the difference better than anyone. Lysara clutched the book to her chest, overwhelmed by the gesture and everything it represented. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank me by reading it, and by telling me what you think. Father always said the best books spark conversation." They talked until the light began to fade, about philosophy and family, and the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who didn't truly see you. When Nell finally came to remind Lysara about dinner, she realized with a start that hours had passed. Something had changed between them. Some invisible barrier had thinned, and as she left the library with Marcus Aurelius pressed against her heart, Lysara wondered if perhaps she was in more danger than she'd realized. The Hartwell ball arrived like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and terrifying. Lysara stood before the mirror in the lavender suite, while Nell arranged her hair in an elaborate style, involving more pins than seemed structurally sound. The sapphire gown fit perfectly, hugging her waist before falling in elegant folds to the floor. Gold embroidery caught the candlelight, making her shimmer with each breath. She looked like someone else. Someone who belonged at balls and soirees and ducal estates. "You're stunning, miss," Nell said, stepping back to admire her work. Stunning. Another word that had never belonged to her. "I'm terrified," Lysara admitted. "That's normal. First balls are always terrifying. But His Grace will be with you, and Lord Corwin says you've been practicing the dances all week." She had. Corwin had appointed himself her dancing instructor, guiding her through waltzes and quadrilles with patient good humor, while she stepped on his feet and apologized endlessly. By the third day, she'd managed to complete an entire waltz without drawing blood. "Small victories," Corwin had declared, limping only slightly. Now, as the carriage rolled toward Hartwell House, Lysara tried to remember everything she'd learned. The steps of each dance, the rules of social precedence, which topics were appropriate for conversation, and which would mark her as hopelessly provincial. Hadrian sat across from her, resplendent in formal black evening wear that made him look even more intimidating than usual. The Duchess had declined to attend, citing a headache that Lysara suspected was entirely tactical. "You'll be the subject of intense curiosity," Hadrian said, breaking the silence. "Everyone will want to know who you are, where you came from, why I've suddenly appeared with a woman no one recognizes. What should I tell them? The truth, modified for public consumption. You're a friend of my family, a distant connection through your mother's side. You've been in mourning, which explains your absence from society. This season marks your return." That's a lot of lies to remember. Lies are easier than truth. Truth requires explanation. Lies require only confidence. The carriage slowed, joining a queue of vehicles approaching the grand entrance. Through the window, Lysara could see Hartwell House ablaze with lights, music spilling from open doors, elegantly dressed figures ascending the steps. Her stomach clenched. "Breathe," Hadrian said quietly. "You survived my mother. You can survive this." "Your mother only wanted to destroy me if I hurt you. These people will want to destroy me for sport." "Then don't give them ammunition." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "You are intelligent, capable, and possessed of more substance than anyone in that ballroom. Remember that. Let them see someone worth knowing, not someone desperate for approval." The carriage door opened before she could respond. Hadrian stepped out first, then turned to offer his hand. Lysara took it, acutely aware of the warmth of his grip through her silk gloves, and descended into a sea of watching eyes. The whispers started immediately. "Who is she?" "Never seen her before." "The Duke's companion? How curious. Rather plain, isn't she?" Lysara kept her chin high, her expression serene, even as each murmur landed like a small stone against her composure. Hadrian's hand moved to the small of her back, a steadying pressure that anchored her as they climbed the steps. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They'll gossip regardless. Give them something worth gossiping about." Inside, the ballroom was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across dancers, who moved in perfect synchronized waves. The heat of hundreds of candles mixed with perfume and sweat and the sharp tang of champagne. Everywhere she looked, there were diamonds and silks and faces that assessed her with predatory interest. "Your Grace." A woman in crimson swept toward them, her smile bright and calculating. "How delightful to see you emerge from your hermitage. And who is this delightful creature?" "Lady Marchmont. May I present Miss Lysara Wincombe?" "Miss Wincombe, Lady Marchmont." Lysara curtsied, grateful for hours of practice. "A pleasure, my lady." "Wincombe." Lady Marchmont's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't believe I know the family." "We're from the north, my lady. My father is Baron Wincombe of Briarfield." "How quaint. And how did you come to know his grace?" "Through mutual connections," Hadrian interjected smoothly. "Miss Wincombe's mother was acquainted with my family before her difficult circumstances arose. I'm merely fulfilling a promise to ensure her daughter is properly introduced to society." The lie flowed effortlessly, but Lady Marchmont's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "How very noble of you, Your Grace. I look forward to becoming better acquainted with Miss Wincombe." The emphasis on better suggested interrogation rather than friendship. "Perhaps at the Thorndale Musicale next week?" "Perhaps," Hadrian agreed, already guiding Lysara away. The next hour was a blur of introductions and assessments, lords and ladies, viscounts and baronets, a dizzying hierarchy of titles and precedences that Lysara struggled to keep straight. Everyone smiled, everyone was pleasant, and beneath every pleasant smile she sensed calculation. "They're wondering what you're worth," Hadrian said during a brief respite near the refreshment table. "What advantage you represent, what weakness they can exploit. And what am I worth? That depends on what they discover. If you're a potential duchess, you're a threat to every unmarried woman in this room. If you're merely a temporary amusement, you're an opportunity for gossip and condescension. Neither option sounds appealing. Welcome to society." His smile was grim. "Now, the waltz is beginning. Will you dance with me?" Lysara's pulse quickened. "In front of everyone?" "That's rather the point." He extended his hand. "Show them who you are, Miss Wincombe. Show them what they've been missing while they were busy watching the obvious beauties." She took his hand. The orchestra launched into a sweeping melody as they took their place among the other dancers. Lysara could feel hundreds of eyes tracking their every movement, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Don't think," Hadrian murmured, his hand warm at her waist. "Don't count. Just follow." She tried. Let the music guide her instead of her racing thoughts. Let his steady lead pull her through turns and sweeps that would have terrified her a week ago. The chandeliers above became streaks of golden light. The watching faces blurred into impressionist smudges. There was only the swell of violins, the pressure of his palm against her back, and the strange electricity that seemed to crackle between them with every step. "You're doing perfectly," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm terrified." "That's because you're brave. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it." They turned across the floor, and Lysara caught glimpses of faces in the crowd. Curious, envious, hostile, but also, here and there, something that looked almost like respect. "They're watching us," she whispered. "Let them watch." His grip tightened slightly at her waist. "Let them see something real for once." The waltz ended too soon. They stood together in the center of the ballroom, breathing slightly hard, and for a moment, It seemed like the entire world had contracted to the space between them. Then the spell broke. Other couples claimed the floor for the next dance. Society surged back around them with its demands and expectations. But something had changed. Lysara could feel it in the way people looked at her now, with curiosity instead of dismissal, with speculation instead of condescension. And she could feel it in the way Hadrian looked at her, like she mattered, like she was worth seeing. They retreated to a small alcove near the terrace doors, partially hidden from the crowd by a potted palm and a strategically placed column. The night air drifted through the open windows, cool and welcome after the heat of the ballroom. "You did well," Hadrian said. "I didn't fall. That's hardly well. You did more than not fall. You commanded attention. There's a difference between being looked at and being seen. Tonight, people saw you. Because I was with you. Because you were yourself." He stepped closer, and her breathing faltered. "You didn't perform. You didn't simper or flatter or pretend. You were honest and genuine and utterly different from everyone else in that room. I was terrified. You were magnificent." The word hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them had acknowledged. "Hadrian." She used his name without thinking, too overwhelmed to maintain formality. "Lysara." He was so close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the slight imperfection in his otherwise aristocratic features, where his nose had been broken at some point in his youth, close enough to smell cedar and sandalwood, and something darker she couldn't name. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "What wasn't? This. Whatever this is. We had an arrangement, terms and conditions. Nothing was supposed to be real. And if it's becoming real anyway, she should step back, should remind him of boundaries, of expectations, of the impossible gap between a duke and a baron's forgotten daughter. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. Then I don't know what we do. I have a suggestion." His hand came up to cup her face, gentle and questioning. "We stop pretending we know what we're doing, and we simply see what happens." He kissed her. It was soft at first, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when she leaned into him instead, it deepened into something that made her knees weak and her heart race, and every rational thought evaporate like morning mist. This was not part of the arrangement. This was not sensible or practical or carefully negotiated. This was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely, completely real. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Lysara found herself clinging to his lapels like they were the only solid thing in a spinning world. That, she managed, was not in our terms. No. His smile was softer than she'd ever seen it. It wasn't. We should probably discuss tomorrow. We can discuss everything tomorrow. His thumb traced her cheekbone, achingly gentle. Tonight. Just let it be what it is. Whatever that means. A burst of laughter from the ballroom shattered the moment. Reality crashed back in, bringing with it the awareness of where they were, who they were, and how exposed this alcove truly was. "We should return," Lysara said reluctantly. "We should." But he didn't move. Neither did she. Finally, Hadrian stepped back, offering his arm with exaggerated formality that was somehow tender rather than cold. "Shall we rejoin the tedious masses, Miss Wincombe?" "I suppose we must, Your Grace." They returned to the ballroom together, and if anyone noticed that their composure was slightly ruffled, their color slightly high, the whispers that followed them were nothing compared to the whisper of his kiss still burning on her lips. Tomorrow, they would have to face reality. Tonight, reality could wait. The reality Lysara had been avoiding arrived 2 days later in the form of her sister. Cassia swept into Thornwood Hall like a golden tempest, all perfect curls and wounded dignity, and the kind of beauty that made everyone in a room suddenly feel inadequate. "The Duchess invited me," she announced, when Lysara stared at her in shock from the library doorway. "She thought I might enjoy the season in London, and since my prospects in the north seemed to have been quite thoroughly sabotaged, I had no reason to refuse." "Cassia, I didn't what? Steal the attention of the Duke who came specifically to court me? Run off to his estate to play whatever game you're playing? Leave me to explain to Father why his careful plans had gone up in smoke?" Cassia's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You've done all of those things, Lysara. You just didn't mean to. That's your defense, isn't it? Poor, invisible Lysara, who never means to do anything but somehow always ends up exactly where she wants to be." The accusation landed like a slap. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Cassia moved further into the library, trailing her fingers along the book spines with deliberate carelessness. "You've always resented me. Don't deny it. I've seen the way you look at me when Father fusses over my gowns, while you manage the accounts he can't be bothered to understand. You hate that I'm the beautiful one, the valuable one, the one who matters. I never. And now you've found a way to take even that from me." Cassia turned, her blue eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been fury. "The Duke of Thornwood, one of the most eligible men in England. He came to our home to meet me, and somehow you convinced him to choose you instead. How does that feel, Lysara? Finally being the one who's noticed?" Lysara's throat burned with words she couldn't say. The truth was too complicated. Yes, she had resented Cassia sometimes. Yes, she had wished, in her darkest moments, that someone would see her instead of her beautiful sister. But she'd never wanted to hurt Cassia. She'd never wanted this. "The Duke and I have an arrangement," she said carefully. "It's temporary. A performance, nothing more." "A performance," Cassia laughed, the sound brittle. "Is that what you're calling it? Because I saw the way he looked at you when you arrived for dinner last night. That wasn't performance, Lysara. That was something else entirely." Color rose swiftly to Lysara's cheeks. She couldn't deny it. Since the ball, since that kiss in the alcove, everything between her and Hadrian had shifted. They hadn't spoken of it directly, but the awareness was there in every glance, every accidental touch, and every conversation that lingered longer than necessary. "Whatever you think you saw, I saw a man who's falling in love with my plain, invisible sister, while I'm supposed to smile and pretend I don't notice." Cassia's voice cracked. "Do you have any idea how that feels? To be the beautiful one, the one everyone always wanted, and to watch as someone chooses the one no one wanted instead?" The vulnerability beneath her anger made Lysara's chest ache. "Cassia, I'm sorry. I never intended. That's the problem, isn't it? You never intend anything. Things just happen to you, and you float along being sensible and practical, while the rest of us deal with the consequences." Cassia moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "The Duchess has invited me to stay for the season, to be introduced to appropriate suitors. That was your condition, wasn't it? Your negotiated term? Yes. How generous of you. How magnanimous. Making sure your discarded sister gets scraps from your table." Cassia's smile was devastating. "Enjoy your Duke, Lysara. Enjoy your fairy tale. But remember that fairy tales end, and when this one does, you'll be back to being nobody, while I'm still the one everyone sees first." She swept out, leaving silence in her wake. Lysara sank into the nearest chair, her hands trembling. Everything Cassia had said was unfair, twisted, a version of events that ignored context and nuance and the complicated truth of their relationship. But some of it was also accurate. She had resented Cassia. She had wanted to be seen. She had accepted Hadrian's arrangement partly because it offered something she'd never had, the chance to be the one who mattered. And now she was falling in love with a duke who was supposed to be her sister's. That sounded unpleasant. Lysara looked up to find Corwin in the doorway, his expression sympathetic. "You heard?" "I'm afraid half the house heard. Your sister has rather impressive projection." He entered, dropping into the chair across from her. "For what it's worth, she's wrong. About most of it anyway." "Is she?" "Hadrian didn't choose you to hurt her. He chose you because you're the first person he's met in years who sees him instead of his title. That's not theft. That's recognition. It doesn't feel that way. Feelings are complicated." Corwin leaned forward, his usually light expression serious. "But here's what I know. My brother has been a ghost since our father died, walking through life without actually living it. And since you arrived, something's changed." He laughs. He seeks out conversation. He emerges from his study before midnight. He paused. "He's becoming himself again. That matters more than your sister's wounded pride." Lysara wanted to believe him, but Cassia's words had planted seeds of doubt that were already taking root. "What if she's right about how this ends?" she asked quietly. "What if I'm just a temporary distraction, a novelty that wears off?" "What if you're not?" Corwin countered. "What if this is real, and you're so afraid of hoping that you're already planning your retreat?" She didn't have an answer for that. Later that evening, as she dressed for dinner, Lysara overheard voices drifting from the hallway. Cassia and the Duchess walking past her door. "She's charming in her way," the Duchess was saying, her tone carrying the careful neutrality of someone managing a delicate situation. "But hardly appropriate for a permanent match. Hadrian will eventually see reason." "Will he?" Cassia's voice was honey-sweet. "He seems rather taken with her. Infatuation fades, particularly when one's prospects become clear. Your sister has no fortune, no connections, and no family name of consequence. When the season ends, and reality asserts itself, Hadrian will understand what he nearly sacrificed for a moment's fancy. And then appropriate matches will be made, for both of you." The Duchess's voice faded as they moved away. "Patience, my dear. These things sort themselves out." Lysara stood frozen in her room, their words echoing in her mind. Hardly appropriate. Infatuation fades. A moment's fancy. This was what she'd feared from the beginning. What she'd known, deep down, was true. The gap between her world and Hadrian's wasn't something that could be bridged by a kiss in an alcove or a waltz at a ball. She was temporary. She had always been temporary. And perhaps it was time to stop pretending otherwise. The Thorndale Music Hall was supposed to be a gentle affair. Chamber music, polite conversation, refreshments that wouldn't stain silk. Instead, it became the evening everything shattered. Lysara had been avoiding Hadrian since overhearing the Duchess's conversation with Cassia. She'd pleaded headaches to skip breakfast, claimed correspondence to miss luncheon, and retreated to her room with books she couldn't focus on. Every time she saw him, every time their eyes met across a room, she felt the weight of words she couldn't say. "This is temporary. I am temporary. Whatever you think you feel will fade when you remember who I really am." But the music hall couldn't be avoided. Lady Thorndale was a particular friend of the Duchess, and absence would be remarked upon, analyzed, used as evidence of whatever theory society had already constructed about the mysterious Miss Wincombe. So Lysara dressed in silver silk that felt like armor and descended the stairs to find Hadrian waiting in the entrance hall. "You've been avoiding me," he said without preamble. "I've been unwell." "You've been lying." His voice was quiet but certain. "Something changed after the ball. Something I did or said or... We should go. The carriage is waiting." She walked past him before he could respond, before the concern in his eyes could crack through the walls she'd spent 3 days rebuilding. The musicale was exactly as tedious as expected. Talented performers playing for an audience that barely listened, too occupied with gossip and social positioning to appreciate the music. Lysara sat beside Cassia, acutely aware of her sister's perfect posture and practiced smile. "You look pale," Cassia murmured during a violin sonata. "Guilt doesn't suit you." "I'm not guilty." "No? Then why have you been hiding in your room like a criminal awaiting sentencing?" Before Lysara could respond, the music ended, and polite applause scattered through the room. Lady Thorndale rose to announce refreshments, and the gathering fragmented into smaller clusters of conversation. Lysara found herself near the windows, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass, when Lady Marchmont appeared at her elbow. "Miss Wincombe, how lovely to see you again." The warmth in her voice was entirely manufactured. Lysara had learned to recognize the difference. "Lady Marchmont, I've been asking about you, making inquiries among mutual acquaintances." Lady Marchmont's smile sharpened. "It's fascinating how little anyone seems to know about the Wincombe family, almost as if you appeared from nowhere." "We're from the north, my lady. Country families don't generate much London gossip." "Perhaps. Or perhaps there's more to the story than a modest country background." Lady Marchmont leaned closer, her voice dropping. "I know your father's finances are in ruins. I know your family has been desperately seeking advantageous matches for years. I know you're not some distant connection of the Ashworth family. You're the forgotten daughter of a failed baron, playing a role far above your station." Lysara's blood ran cold. "I wonder," Lady Marchmont continued conversationally, "what the Duke would think if he knew the truth. That his charming companion is nothing more than a fortune hunter's daughter, scheming her way into his good graces." "I'm not scheming anything." "Aren't you? You arrive from nowhere, capture his attention, install yourself in his home, and now you're paraded through society like a potential duchess." Lady Marchmont's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "I've seen your type before, Miss Wincombe. You smile and simper and play the innocent, but underneath, you're calculating every advantage, measuring every opportunity." "That's not true, isn't it? Then prove it. Walk away. Return to your crumbling estate and your desperate family, and let the Duke find someone worthy of his position." The words landed like blows, each one striking a wound Lysara had been trying to ignore, because beneath the malice, beneath the cruelty, Lady Marchmont was voicing the same doubts that had been gnawing at Lysara since the beginning. She didn't belong here. She was playing a role, wearing borrowed clothes, pretending to be someone she wasn't. And no matter how real her feelings had become, the fundamental truth remained. She was temporary. "Lysara," Hadrian's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He was standing a few feet away, his features carefully neutral, clearly having caught the tail end of the conversation. "Your Grace." Lady Marchmont's smile became syrupy. "Miss Wincombe and I were just having a delightful chat about her background. Such a fascinating story." "Lady Marchmont," Hadrian's voice could have frozen the temps. "I believe your husband is looking for you." She departed with a knowing smile, leaving devastation in her wake. "What did she say to you?" Hadrian asked, stepping closer. "The truth." Lysara's voice came out hollow. Nothing she said was untrue. Whatever she said, "I'm a fortune hunter's daughter playing above my station." She said, "I'm scheming my way into your good graces." She said, "I should walk away and let you find someone worthy." Lysara met his eyes, and she saw the moment he recognized what was happening. "She was right about all of it except the scheming. I never schemed. But the rest—" "Lysara, stop. I don't belong here, Hadrian. I never did. I got swept up in the fantasy, in the dresses and the balls, and the way you looked at me like I mattered. But I'm still the same person I was when you found me adjusting candles in my father's dining room. Still invisible. Still nobody. You are not nobody. To you, maybe. For now. But your mother is right. Infatuation fades. When it does, you'll see what everyone else sees. A plain, penniless woman who got ideas above her station. His face went pale. You heard that? Every word. She stepped back, putting distance between them. I'm going home. Tomorrow. I'll write to my mother tonight. Arrange the carriage in the morning. This arrangement has run its course. Lysara, please, thank you for everything. The dresses, the introductions, the chance to be seen. I'll treasure the memory. Her voice cracked despite her efforts. But I can't stay and watch you realize I was a mistake. I'd rather leave now. Well, I can still pretend this meant something real. She walked away before he could respond, before the tears she'd been fighting could fall, before she could change her mind. Briarfield Manor looked smaller than Lysara remembered. She sat in the carriage that had brought her home, staring at the familiar facade, the overgrown hedges, and the windows that needed cleaning. 3 weeks ago, this had been her entire world. Now it felt like a faded photograph of someone else's life. Her mother met her at the door with worried eyes and gentle hands. Lysara, darling, we weren't expecting you. Your letter said the season is over. For me, anyway. Lysara allowed herself to be guided inside, to the modest parlor with its worn furniture and familiar smells of beeswax and lavender. Where's father? In his study, drinking, I expect. He's been doing that more since you left. Her mother's gaze was shrewd, seeing too much. What happened? Nothing. Everything. Lysara sank onto the settee, suddenly exhausted. I made a mistake, Mother. I let myself believe in something that was never real. The Duke. You know about the Duke. Cassia wrote, extensively. Her mother settled beside her, taking her hands. She was upset, but underneath the anger, I could tell she was also relieved. That match was never right for her. She would have been miserable. She thinks I stole him. You can't steal what was never hers. Her mother's thumb traced circles on Lysara's palm, the same soothing gesture she'd used when Lysara was a child. Tell me what really happened. Not the version you've constructed to protect yourself. The truth. So Lysara told her. Everything. The garden conversation, the arrangement, and the conditions she'd negotiated. The library talks and the borrowed book and the way Hadrian had started looking at her like she was extraordinary. The ball. The kiss. The growing certainty that what had started as performance had become something terrifyingly real. And then Lady Marchmont's words, the Duchess's conversation with Cassia, the weight of evidence that she was fooling herself, reaching for something that could never belong to her. When she finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. You know, she said finally, when I married your father, everyone said I was reaching above my station. My family had money but no title. His family had title but needed money. Was supposed to be a transaction, nothing more. What happened? I fell in love with him. Her mother smiled, sad and knowing. Against all odds, despite every practical reason not to. And for years, it was wonderful. We were happy, truly happy, not just performing happiness for others. What changed? Nothing changed. That's the point. Love doesn't protect you from difficulty. It doesn't guarantee success. Your father's investments failed regardless of how much we loved each other. But I never regretted choosing him, not even in our worst moments. She paused, letting the words settle. Not even now, when things are hardest. How is that possible? Because regret comes from not trying, from letting fear make your decisions for you. Her mother squeezed her hands. You're afraid this Duke will realize you're not enough. But darling, what if he doesn't? What if he sees exactly who you are and loves you anyway? Isn't that worth the risk? And if he doesn't? If I stay and he eventually sees what everyone else sees? Then you'll survive, you'll hurt, and you'll heal, and you'll know that at least you were brave enough to try. Her mother stood, moving toward the window. But running away doesn't make the wanting go away. It just makes you wonder, forever, what might have been. Lysara sat with those words, feeling their weight settle into her chest. She was still sitting there an hour later when the sound of hooves thundered up the drive. Through the window, she saw a familiar figure dismount, dark hair disheveled, riding clothes splashed with mud, looking like he'd ridden through half the night without stopping. Hadrian. Well, her mother said mildly, it seems someone didn't accept your farewell. Lysara was still deciding whether to flee or face him when the front door burst open, and he was there, filling the modest parlor with his presence, his desperation, his absolute refusal to let her disappear. You left, he said, breathing hard. You left without giving me a chance to respond. There was nothing to say. There was everything to say. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. I love you. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you told me wilted roses make a poor impression. I love your honesty and your courage, and the way you see through pretense to truth. I love that you negotiated conditions with a duke and meant every word. I love that you're afraid and brave simultaneously, that you expect the worst while hoping for the best, that you've spent your whole life being overlooked and still became someone extraordinary. Lysara's eyes filled with tears. Hadrian, I'm not finished. His voice cracked. I know what you heard. I know what Lady Marchmont said. But they're wrong. My mother is wrong. Society is wrong. You're not temporary. You're not a fancy or a distraction or a phase I'll outgrow. You're the first real thing I've felt since my father died, and I will not let you walk away, because other people can't see what I see. What do you see? Everything. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. I see everything, Lysara, and I choose you. Not despite who you are, but because of it. The question is whether you'll choose me back. She thought of her mother's words. Running doesn't make the wanting go away. She thought of all the years she'd spent being invisible, safe, protected from disappointment by never hoping for more. She thought of how it felt to be seen. Yes, she whispered. I choose you. He kissed her then, in her family's modest parlor, with her mother discreetly retreating to give them privacy. It was desperate and tender, and tasted of tears and relief, and the terrifying promise of a future neither of them could predict. There's still the matter of my mother, he said when they finally parted. I know. And society. And your sister. And about 100 other obstacles. I know that too. Are you still willing? Lysara looked at this man who had ridden through the night to find her, who had chosen her over expectation, who saw her when no one else did. I'm willing, she said. For all of it. They returned to Thornwood Hall together, and Lysara faced the Duchess in the morning room, with her heart pounding and her spine straight. Lady Ashworth sat in her usual chair, morning light casting her features in sharp relief. Cassia was notably absent, though whether by design or coincidence Lysara couldn't tell. Hadrian stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back, a silent declaration of where his loyalties lay. So, the Duchess said, you've returned. I have, Your Grace. Despite knowing my feelings on the matter, despite hearing what I said to your sister about the futility of this situation. Because of what you said, Lysara stepped forward, leaving the safety of Hadrian's shadow. You called me inappropriate. You called this infatuation. You said reality would assert itself, and your son would see reason. I did. You were wrong. The Duchess's eyebrow rose, but she said nothing, I understand why you think that, Lysara continued, her voice steadier than she felt. I have no fortune, no title, no grand family connections. By every measure society uses, I am completely unsuitable for your son. You look at me and see risk. The risk that he's making a mistake. The risk that our children will be tainted by my common blood. The risk that the Ashworth legacy will be diminished by my presence. You state the obvious. I do. Because I want you to know I've considered every argument against this match. I've lain awake at night cataloging my inadequacies. I've listened to Lady Marchmont enumerate my unworthiness. I've watched your face when you look at me and seen exactly what you see. A plain, penniless woman with nothing to offer but herself. And yet you're still here. I'm still here because your son loves me, not my family name or my dowry or the political advantages I might bring. Me, the woman who adjusts candles when no one is watching. The woman who managed her father's failing estate, while everyone focused on her beautiful sister. The woman who has spent her entire life being invisible, and somehow, impossibly, became visible to him. The Duchess was silent, her face a composed and impenetrable mask. You said you wanted him to live again, Lysara continued. You told me, that first night, that he'd been drowning in grief and duty since his father died. That you'd tried everything, pressure, patience, suitable matches, and nothing worked. I remember what I said. Then remember this too. I didn't pursue him. I didn't scheme or manipulate or play the games fortune hunters play. I was honest with him from the first moment, sometimes painfully so. I told him truths no one else dared to tell. I saw him as a person, not a title or a prize. And somewhere in all that honesty, he started to live again. Lysara moved closer, close enough to see the fine lines around the Duchess's eyes, the silver threads in her dark hair, the weariness beneath her aristocratic composure. I know you love him, she said softly. Everything you do, even the parts that hurt, comes from wanting to protect him. But he doesn't need protection from me. He needs someone who sees him clearly and chooses him anyway. That's what I offer. Not fortune or connections or social advantage. Just me, seeing him, choosing him, for as long as he'll have me. The silence stretched between them, sharp as a held breath. Then the Duchess stood, and Lysara braced herself for dismissal, for cutting words, for the destruction she'd been promised. Instead, Lady Ashworth crossed to a cabinet near the window and withdrew a small velvet box. This ring belonged to Hadrian's grandmother, she said, opening it to reveal a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. She was a merchant's daughter, utterly unsuitable. My husband's family opposed the match violently. They said she would dilute the bloodline, diminish the legacy, and bring shame upon generations of Ashworths. Lysara stared at the ring, uncomprehending. She was also the finest duchess this family has ever produced. She managed estates brilliantly, raised children who became leaders, and loved my father-in-law with a devotion that lasted until her final breath. The Duchess met Lysara's eyes. I was wrong about her. The family was wrong. Perhaps I am wrong about you. Your Grace, I'm not giving you my blessing. The words were sharp, but not cruel. I still have reservations. You're untested, unknown, a gamble at best. But my son has chosen you, and he has been dead inside for 3 years. And if you're the one who brought him back to life, then perhaps that matters more than pedigree. She pressed the ring box into Lysara's hands. Prove me wrong, Miss Wincombe. Prove that I was an old fool who couldn't see past lineage to character. Prove that my son's judgment is better than mine. Lysara's hands trembled around the velvet box. I'll try. Trying isn't enough. Succeed. The Duchess's voice softened almost imperceptibly. He's lost enough. Don't make him lose you too. She swept from the room, leaving Lysara and Hadrian alone with the weight of her conditional surrender. "That went better than expected," Hadrian said after a moment. Lysara laughed, the sound watery with unshed tears. "She gave me your grandmother's ring. She gave you a challenge disguised as a gift." He took the box from her hands, removing the ring carefully. "But challenges can be met. Will you wear it? Is this a proposal? Consider it a promise. The proposal comes later, when we've sorted out the rest of the obstacles." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. "For now, this says you're mine, and I'm yours, and everyone who sees it will know that the Duke of Thornwood chose the quiet girl no one noticed." Lysara looked at the sapphire glinting on her hand, at the man who had given it to her, at the impossible future stretching out before them. "One obstacle down," she said. "Several dozen to go. Then we'd better get started." The Ashworth Ball was the event of the season, an annual tradition that drew the cream of society to Thornwood Hall for an evening of unparalleled elegance. This year, whispers suggested, would feature an announcement that would shock everyone. Lysara stood at the top of the grand staircase in a gown of deep rose silk, her mother's pearls replaced by diamonds, on loan from the Duchess herself. Beside her, Cassia waited in gold, looking genuinely beautiful, and for the first time in weeks, genuinely peaceful. "Are you ready?" Cassia asked. "I don't know." Their relationship had shifted since Lysara's return, not healed entirely. Wounds that deep took time. But something had changed when Cassia watched her face down the Duchess. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition that her quiet sister had strengths she'd never bothered to notice. "He's waiting for you," Cassia said, practically vibrating with nerves. "It's rather endearing. You're being kind. I'm being honest." Cassia turned to face her, and her expression was layered with unspoken emotion, regret, acceptance, something that might have been sisterly love finally emerging from jealousy's shadow. "I was wrong about you. I thought you were stealing something that belonged to me. But the truth is, he was never mine. I didn't want him. I wanted what he represented: escape, security, a future different from what I feared. You actually want him, the person, not the title. Cassia, go, before I say something sentimental and ruin my reputation for cutting remarks." But she was smiling, and when she squeezed Lysara's hand, it felt like forgiveness. The ballroom below was filled with people, hundreds of them, all watching as Lysara descended the staircase alone. The whispers started immediately, speculating, calculating, waiting to see what would happen next. Hadrian met her at the bottom of the stairs. He looked devastatingly handsome in formal evening wear, but what struck Lysara most was his expression. Open, unguarded, radiating a happiness she'd never seen in him before. The grief that had shadowed his eyes for 3 years had finally begun to lift. "You're late," he said. Fashionably so. "Terrifying, you mean?" But he was smiling as he took her hand. "Are you ready?" "For what?" "For everything." He led her to the center of the ballroom, where a space had been cleared, where everyone could see them. The orchestra fell silent. Conversations died. Every eye in the room fixed on the Duke of Thornwood and the woman who had come from nowhere to capture his heart. Hadrian didn't kneel. He didn't make a spectacle of himself. He simply stood before her, holding both her hands in his, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. 6 weeks ago, I walked into a baron's dining room expecting to meet a beautiful woman I could court out of duty. Instead, I found someone adjusting candles because she noticed they were too close to the flowers. She was invisible to everyone else in that room. But I saw her. Emotion welled in Lysara's chest, and she blinked against the burning in her eyes. I saw intelligence and capability, and a fierce honesty that cut through every pretense I'd built around myself. I saw someone who had been overlooked her entire life, yet still maintained the grace to care about wilting roses. I saw the woman I wanted to spend my life with. The whispers had stopped entirely. The ballroom was silent. Society will say this match is unsuitable, that I'm throwing away my position for a woman without fortune or connections. They'll say I've been bewitched, deceived, manipulated into making a choice I'll regret. His voice hardened. They're wrong. He released one of her hands, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a second ring, not his grandmother's sapphire, but something new. A ruby, deep red as heart's blood, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light like scattered stars. Lysara Wincombe, I choose you, not despite your lack of fortune, but regardless of it. Not because society approves, but because my heart demands it. I choose you today, and I will choose you every day, for as long as you'll have me. He slid the ring onto her finger beside his grandmother's sapphire. Will you marry me? Will you be my duchess, my partner, my visible woman in a world that tried to keep you invisible? Will you let me spend the rest of my life ensuring you're never overlooked again? The ballroom held its breath. Lysara thought of candles and roses, of ledgers that never balanced, of years spent managing from the shadows while others claimed the light. She thought of a man who had looked at her when no one else did and seen something worth choosing. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong, 1,000 times. Yes. He kissed her then in front of everyone, in defiance of propriety, in celebration of a love that had grown from arrangement into something real. The crowd erupted, some in applause, some in scandal, most in the delighted shock of witnessing something unexpected and genuine. The Duchess watched from across the room, her expression thoughtful. Cassia stood beside her, and when their eyes met, she smiled and raised her glass in silent acknowledgement. Corwin appeared at Hadrian's elbow, grinning broadly. Well done, brother. The gossips will be busy for months. Let them gossip. Hadrian pulled Lysara closer. I have everything I want. 1 year later, Lysara stood in the grand dining room of Thornwood Hall, watching servants prepare for another ball. Everything was in order. The flowers fresh, the silver gleaming, the wine properly chilled. But the candles were wrong. She moved along the wall, adjusting the candelabra with practiced efficiency, ensuring the tapers wouldn't wilt the roses. Some habits, she had learned, never truly changed. They simply became part of who you were. You're doing it again. Hadrian's voice came from the doorway, warm with amusement and love. Someone has to notice these things. The servants notice. You've trained them well. And yet, she smiled, stepping back to survey her work. Old habits. He crossed the room to wrap his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Through the window, they could see guests arriving, carriages rolling up the drive, the glitter of London society descending on their home. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Leaving your invisible life for all this scrutiny? Lysara turned in his arms, facing the man who had seen her when no one else did. Never. Not for a moment. Even when Lady Marchmont makes snide remarks about your background? Especially then. Her remarks mean I've disrupted her comfortable assumptions. That's rather satisfying. Hadrian laughed, the sound free and genuine in a way it never had been when they first met. The grief was still there. It always would be. But it had been joined by joy, by love, by a future he'd stopped believing he deserved. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket. Inside was a book, leather-bound, old, clearly well-loved. She opened it to find Marcus Aurelius's handwriting in the margins, not the copy she already treasured, but a companion volume, annotated with his father's final thoughts. I found it last month, Hadrian said. hidden in his study behind other books. I think he meant to give it to me, but he ran out of time. Yes, he touched the pages gently. There's a passage he marked, near the end. Lysara turned to the bookmarked page and found the words underlined in fading ink. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, below it in his father's hand, and the quality of your thoughts depends upon those you choose to think beside. Choose someone who makes you think better. Choose someone who sees you clearly. Choose love, always, over duty. Her eyes filled with tears. He would have liked you, Hadrian said softly. He would have seen exactly what I see. What do you see? Everything. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, and her lips. I see everything. From downstairs, the orchestra began to play, summoning them to their guests, to their duties, to the life they'd built together against all expectations. But for this moment, in this room where candles flickered perfectly placed against their roses, the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood were simply two people who had found each other. The quiet girl no one noticed, the grieving man who couldn't stop watching, and a love that began with wilted flowers and ended with forever. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that sees beyond surface to soul, in characters who find each other against impossible odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming. Every moment you spend with these characters matters. Do you have a favorite scene or line? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romantic tales with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that the quiet ones get their fairy tales. 2. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.